Wicked flips the script and gives us a whole new side of the Wizard of Oz. Baby, we're talking connections, timelines, and some jaw-dropping parallels that will have you seeing this classic story in a whole new light. We're about to break it all down so you don't miss a single beat. Now, y'all know The Wizard of Oz, the 1939 musical that so many of us grew up watching. And trust, the media has been milking that story for years. It's all based on Frank Baume's 1900 children's novel. But Wicked? Oh honey, that's a whole other vibe. It's based on the Broadway smash hit by Winnie Holzman, which itself draws from Gregory Maguire's 1995 novel, Wicked, the life and times of the Wicked Witch of the West. So while these two are kissing cousins when it comes to the characters and storyline, their timelines, they take different paths before tying together perfectly. Now, let's get into it. To really break it down, we're gonna map out the timeline of Wicked and then the Wizard of Oz, so everything flows nice and smooth. Here's the tea. While the Wizard of Oz plays out over a few weeks, Wicked spans years, giving us all that backstory we didn't even know we needed. The Wizard of Oz kicks off with Dorothy crash landing, literally, on the Wicked Witch of the East. Then Glinda swoops in, gives Dorothy those iconic ruby slippers, and sends her on her merry little way to meet the wizard. But let's not forget, Dorothy's little road trip wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Along the way, she picks up the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion, all while dodging the Wicked Witch, who was out here bullying Dorothy like it was her full-time job. By the end, Dorothy melts the Wicked Witch, meets the wizard, and clicks her heels right back home. A happy ending for her. But trust, there's way more to this story than what Dorothy saw. What's wild is Wicked picks up right where the Wizard of Oz leaves off. Sis, we're talking about the tea behind the Wicked Witch of the West, whose real name is Elphaba. Dorothy just melted her, the townsfolk are throwing a whole party like it's a holiday, and Glinda the Good Witch rolls up to soak in the applause. But instead of just celebrating, Glinda spills all the backstory about her connection to Elphaba, and baby, it's juicy. She starts by explaining how Elphaba was born green, yes, green, because her mama stepped out on her daddy, the governor of Munchkinland, and got caught up with some green elixir mess. To make it even messier, Elphaba's mama had another daughter, Nessarose, with her actual husband, and Nessarose was the golden child. She's the one who ends up as the Wicked Witch of the East. Talk about family drama. But the real heat kicks off at Shiz University, where Glinda, Elphaba, and Nessarose all went to school together. Now, Elphaba and Glinda started off hating each other, roommates from hell vibes, but they eventually got tight and became unlikely besties. Meanwhile, at this school, love triangles were popping off left and right. Actually, scratch that. It's more like a love trapezium. Follow me. Glinda's in love with Fiyero, but Fiero's got his heart set on Elphaba. Then there's Nessarose, who's head over heels for this munchkin named Bok. But Bok, girl, he's all about Glinda. Messy, right? And while all this love drama was swirling, there was an even bigger issue brewing. The government of Oz was out here trying to silence the animals. Literally, they were banning them from speaking. Elphaba wasn't having it though. She stepped up as an activist, ready to fight back and stand up for the animals, which added major tension to the story. Alright, let's start making those connections between Wicked and the Wizard of Oz. First off, there's this moment where Elphaba frees a caged lion cub in class. Sounds innocent, right? Wrong. That cub? He grows up to be the cowardly lion we all know from the Wizard of Oz. Now, as the Wicked timeline unfolds, Elphaba and Glinda get invited to meet the wizard. But plot twist, they figure out he's the mastermind behind all the harm going down. This is where that iconic defying gravity moment happens. And one act of the play ends right there with chills. Fast forward 2 years. Yep, we're jumping ahead between Acts 1 and 2. And Elphaba visits Nessa. She upgrades Nessa's slippers with some magical superpowers so Sis can walk again. But hold up, this is when the drama gets real. Bok, who was Nessa's main man, decides to dip because now that she can walk, she doesn't need him anymore. Cold, right? But it gets worse. Nessa, in her feelings, accidentally casts a spell on Bok that makes him lose his heart. And boom, that's how Bok becomes the Tin Man we know from the Wizard of Oz. Now, the government? They're on Elphaba's neck and trying to catch her, so they get messy and use Nessa as bait. This is when things spiral. They conjure up a storm, causing that infamous Twister to hit and drop a house smack on Nessa, killing her. And just like that, we're officially at the start of the Wizard of Oz. Glinda gives Dorothy Nessa's magical slippers, and Dorothy's story takes off from there. But wait, it's not over for Elphaba. She's still fighting to protect her love, Fiyero. To keep him safe, she casts a spell, but Sis doesn't read the fine print because Fiyero ends up turning into the Scarecrow. The chaos. And then, just when you think things can't get messier, Elphaba captures Dorothy to snatch back her sister's shoes. That's where the two timelines fully collide. Dorothy, as we all know, melts Elphaba, and the Wizard of Oz ends on a happy note with Dorothy back home, the townsfolk celebrating, and all that. But here's the gag. Wicked flips that happy ending on its head. Turns out the story doesn't end there. The twist in Wicked will have you looking at the Wizard of Oz completely differently. After Elphaba melts, Glinda finds only 2 things left behind: her hat and that mysterious green elixir. And here's where the plot really thickens. Glinda pieces it all together and realizes the wizard was Elphaba's father this whole time. That's how she got those magical powers in the first place. But Wicked doesn't stop there. The ultimate twist? twist? Fiyero, now the Scarecrow, shows up at the door where Elphaba supposedly melted and finds out Sis faked her death. Yep, Elphaba and Fiyero ride off into the sunset together, living happily ever after, with the rest of Oz none the wiser. It's a whole different vibe from the good versus evil fairy tale ending we grew up with in The Wizard of Oz. Now, let's address some of those burning questions fans have about these two stories. A lot of folks are just discovering Wicked thanks to its latest loose adaptation and are wondering if you need to watch The Wizard of Oz first. The short answer? Nah, you're good. But let's be real, The Wizard of Oz is a whole classic. It's one of the greatest films ever made, and you'd be missing out if you didn't watch it at least once. Plus, it holds a special place in Hollywood history. It was created during that iconic shift from black and white films to Technicolor. You know that magical moment when Dorothy steps into the colorful land of Oz? Legendary. Watching The Wizard of Oz before diving into Wicked also helps you catch all the Easter eggs and callbacks sprinkled throughout the story. Wicked plays on those iconic moments from The Wizard of Oz in ways only true fans will appreciate. All you really need to know, though, is that Elphaba is the so-called Wicked Witch of the West, and Glinda is the ever-so-glamorous Good Witch. The movie digs into their shared history and flips the script on their reputations. It's not just another Wizard of Oz spin-off. It's a revisionist prequel that reimagines Oz with way more depth and complexity than we've ever seen before. Because the timeline can get a little messy, people often ask if Wicked is a prequel to The Wizard of Oz. The answer? Kind of, but it's more than that. Wicked is based on the wildly successful Broadway musical, second highest grossing of all time, okay? Which itself is adapted from Gregory Maguire's novel. The movie version of Wicked is being split into two parts, and when it wraps, the timeline will sync up with The Wizard of Oz, but not without a few changes. Some details from the original will be missing, but the story is still packed with drama and magic that'll have you hooked. While Wicked shares the same setting as The Wizard of Oz, let's be real, it doesn't just copy and paste the story. Nope, Wicked uses the OG as inspiration to flip the script entirely, giving us a fresh narrative with its own vibes. Now, Gregory Maguire's novel? It's darker, messier, and way more layered than both the Broadway musical and the movie. Sure, Wicked sprinkles in nods to the original film and book, but it still manages to carve out its own path that's easy to follow, even if you've never seen The Wizard of Oz. Now here's a fun tidbit. Some details skipped in the original Wizard of Oz movie get their time to shine in Wicked. For example, in Baum's book, Dorothy's slippers were silver, but for the 1939 film, they got upgraded to that iconic ruby red because, honey, Technicolor deserved to flex. Those ruby slippers popped like no other against that yellow brick road. One wild thing about these franchises is how many timelines and story arcs they've spun off. Baum's books birthed a whole universe of remixes and parallel narratives. The man was all about creating a modern American fairy tale, and he nailed it. His Wizard of Oz stories have been reimagined, flipped, and spun into new takes countless times. In Baum's world, the wizard, he's a shameless con man, a slick talker who somehow still helps Dorothy and her squad of misfits. Let's get into it. The wizard is the ultimate trickster. He doesn't give the Cowardly Lion, the Tin Man, or the Scarecrow anything new. He just makes them believe they've had it in them all along. The Cowardly Lion, brave from jumping, the Tin Man, empathetic, the Scarecrow, low-key, brilliant. Their only issue? They didn't believe in themselves. And what does the wizard do? He sells them the lie they need to hear to unlock their full potential. Talk about the power of a good narrative. And speaking of illusions, the wizard was all about that fake it till you make it life. Remember the Emerald City? He made everyone wear green tinted glasses so the place would look way more fabulous than it actually was. Genius, but shady. Baum's mythical land of witches, wizards, talking scarecrows, and golden cornfields mixed old school fairy tale vibes with modern twists, kind of like what George Lucas did with Star Wars. Because of the insane demand, Baum wrote several sequels to The Wizard of Oz. But even with all the spin-offs, the original story still hits hard. Wicked, on the other hand, shakes things up by painting the Wicked Witch as a misunderstood hero while making the wizard look like a straight-up villain plotting to take over Oz. If Wicked has you hooked on Oz's drama, you've got to check out some of the lesser-known gems in the franchise. One underrated pick, the 1985 film Return to Oz. This one goes full spooky, with Dorothy returning to find the Emerald City in ruins. She teams up with a new crew of outcasts to save the day. But let me warn you, it's giving children's horror movie vibes with some wild, unsettling scenes and stunning visual effects. But let's bring it back to where it all started. The biggest showdown in the Oz universe remains the comparison between The Wizard of Oz and Wicked. That parallel timeline is the key to fully understanding how these stories intertwine. And as we wait for the second part of Wicked to drop, it's clear this franchise still has plenty of magic left to give.